So, welcome everybody to Unsolved Mysteries of Resume Writing. I am Nancy Siegel of Solutions for the Workplace, and my guest today is Ellen Steverson of Starting Block Career Services. We are going to help you unravel the mysteries of resumes. And we're going to start with the first impression that you make. And the first impression you make before anybody reads it is, what does your resume actually look like? Is your name in the right place? Can I read it? What font are you using? Is it going to work? How many pages is your resume? Do you have an address on it? What is your email? Am I going to get distracted by a silly email? So I do think it's important to unravel these mysteries of the resume, because your resume is a marketing document. And if we don't attract readers right off, you have lost your opportunity to get the job, or really even get an interview. So setting your resume up properly is critical. So Ellen, thank you for joining me today. Why don't you just introduce yourself here for a moment?
Thank you, Nancy. I'm glad to be here today. As you mentioned, I'm Ellen Steverson with Starting Block Career Services. I've been in business now over 10 years, helping people around the country at all different levels advance their careers with modern strategies. I am a former executive recruiter, so a lot of things we're going to be discussing today are definitely areas that as a recruiter, I would take 6 seconds, and if I made a decision to pass on somebody, it was usually due to some of these mistakes. So it is very important that people do realize that it is, like you said, a marketing document that's going to be glanced at very quickly. And these key areas you're discussing today that we're going to talk about are critical.
All right. And Ellen focuses on private sector resume writing, whereas I focus on federal resume writing. And while there are absolutely some consistencies in terms of approach, there are some very real differences, which we will get into over the course of this interview with some of the basics. So let's start with names. It would be good to have one, right?
Correct. Correct.
And what are some of your thoughts, Ellen, about how people present their names on their resumes?
Well, you do want your name at the top of the resume. It is okay to make your name a little bit bigger than the other fonts below. You want it to be clearly read and readable so somebody right away knows who you are. And you need to think about your name as far as, a lot of times I work with people all around the globe, and some names are just very difficult to pronounce. So when this happens and you have a name that you use a nickname, then you might want to think about putting your legal name first and then putting your nickname in a bracket. So it tells the reader right off, I go by the nickname Joey or MK or whatever your nickname is, and then your last name. So you do want to make sure that you have your legal name, but it is okay to bracket in the middle of your name a nickname to help the person who's going to call you.
Okay, so you mentioned that it's important to have your name at the top of your resume, and I would totally concur for a federal resume. But is it okay to put your name in the header?
No, you do not want to put your name in a header, because that is an area that applicant tracking software, which is used by most companies today, but there's 400 different types. Most of them cannot read information in the header. So on the first page, you do not want to put your name and your contact information, any of that information, in your header. However, on page 2, it is okay to use a header because you're really just kind of putting your name and information on page 2. So if the document gets separated during the course of them passing it around the board table, they know what page 2 goes to what resume. So then it's okay to use the header, but never on the first page.
Okay. So for a federal resume, you apply through usajobs.gov, which is not an applicant tracking system, but still you want your name not in the header. And how do you feel about professional titles or degrees following names?
Depending on the job that you are applying for, I think that's a strategic decision or strategy that you have to align with the job posting. So if you're applying for a job that's looking for a professional engineer, a PE, and it says it multiple times on the job posting, I'm okay with somebody putting John Doe, comma, PE. If it's a job that requires an MBA and it says it multiple times, then I'm okay with you putting comma MBA for that job posting. But most of the time, you do not need to put like a bachelor's, like a BA, a BS, or even MS, MA. It is not necessarily needed right after your name. There's other ways and more creative ways to put it underneath the name in a different format if you want to do something like that, but not necessarily tied to your name.
So I would agree with that for a federal resume. If you have professional certifications, like IT people do an awful lot, you could put those underneath your name. But I would agree, if you put them after your name and you have a lot of certifications, it could run almost the entire top line of your resume. And that looks kind of silly.
Correct, and I agree with you totally. I mean, it's wonderful to have certifications, and you are right. In certain industries, they have more certifications than other industries. So if you're in an industry that you have, say, 10 certifications, and you think they're all important, again, your header by your name is not the place to list 10 acronyms. Okay, it would be better to have your name and then maybe underneath your name or right in the header section or right below it, multi-certified IT professional or IT manager or something like that. So they see right away you're multi-certified, but then when they get to the education and training and all the other sections, they can see all your certifications listed there.
Okay. Something else I see with names that I don't really understand is an honorific like Mr. or Mrs. or whatever. If you're worried about someone not knowing or getting your gender, which is a whole different conversation, then you might want to use a middle name if that's important to you, if that is more clarifying. But to put Mr., Anthony Perkins or Mrs. this, that, or the other thing, it just seems old-fashioned and just wrong.
Correct. I do not recommend that anybody in the private sector is using what I would refer to as a title, Mr., Mrs.
Title. Thank you.
Any of that is just not necessary. Your resume is written in first person, so it's just your first name, last name. My best practice is your legal name, but again, okay to bracket. But I also like to use middle initials, so I like to put Ellen R. Steverson. So that's how I would have it on my resume. So it's okay to have a middle initial if you like that, but you do want to make sure it's a proper name.
And of course, use the same name on your resume as you use on your LinkedIn. And if for any reason the name on some of your legal documents, like transcripts or certifications or something like that, is different than your current legal name, then that requires explanation. I had a client recently who had a legal name change, and he needed to include his transcripts with his application. And the names on his transcripts were totally and completely different. And so what I did is I used his current legal name, and then underneath that, formerly known as, with his birth name, and then legal name change effective such and such a date. And I included that document with his application.
And I think people going forward after listening to this need to realize that you could be asked, or you will probably be asked, for legal documentation. I had a nurse one time who changed her name, but not legally. Excuse me. And she got an offer, but when the HR department did a little more background checking on her, they wanted to rescind the offer because her name was her maiden name, but legally she hadn't gone through the divorce, and legally her name was still her married name. So they felt that she was hiding something.
Mm-hmm.
So again, people have to understand that when you have a name and you are putting it out there into the universe on LinkedIn, your resume, on Facebook, Twitter, any of these things where people can see your name, if you're using all different names in all different ways, it makes people wonder. Why are they doing that? What's the problem here? Why? And that is the last thing you want people to do when they see your resume, is start to wonder. Because if they wonder, they'll get nervous. If they get nervous, they'll pass. They'll say, I don't want to interview this person. And the whole point of the resume is to generate an interview.
Absolutely. And on the federal side, it's even more complicated because everybody who works for the federal government is going to go through some level of security screening or background check.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are red flags that go up, like different names in different places, at the very least, it's going to lengthen an already lengthy hiring process. So,
and you're absolutely right. My husband has clearance, and he goes by a nickname and same first name as his father. So over the years, he goes by his middle name, and that definitely throughout his clearance process, you know, he had to explain it, justify it. It extended it. So you are absolutely right with that.
Yes. So, I mean, we've probably spent more time talking about names than anybody ever thought possible. So let's move on to talk about addresses.
So, you know, the resume industry is kind of changing with this address, especially with security issues. You know, now people upload their resumes onto the internet. So it is becoming more common to leave off your street address. However, city, state, and zip code is a must for a private company, because in the applicant tracking software, they can actually use the zip code as a keyword or search by people by, you know, 4 or 5 zip codes in the area if they don't want to pay for relocation and they want somebody local. So if you omit city, state, and zip code, that could hurt you in your resume being looked at. So I do recommend that. I definitely recommend that people, you know, on their street, if they're going to upload their resume, to please leave that information off. You know, security is something you need to be aware of and mindful of. I do not recommend anybody ever put a P.O. box on a resume.
And why is that?
Because, again, most people see that as you're not settled. You know, when I used to do executive recruiting, they saw that as, you know, well, do they live there? Are they in the area? Or are they just using that to, like, so they have the city, state, and zip code? And granted, when I do have people that are relocating and wanting to relocate, best practice is maybe to put, if you know you're willing to pay for the relocation, you're not anticipating the company to pay, because so many no longer do that, it's okay to put Orlando, Florida, and the zip code, or, you know, Charleston, South Carolina, and the zip code, whatever big city or wherever you're going, a rural town or whatever. However, a P.O. box doesn't really signify that you're settled and living somewhere, so they just don't particularly care for them.
Okay, thank you.
What do you find in the federal resumes?
So on the federal side, this is something that is different. Federal resumes require the use of a full address. Mm-hmm. No P.O. box, but a street address, including, you know, the street as well as the city, state, and the zip. Now, I certainly think it is fair to say that I have seen resumes move through the system that don't include a street address, but you should also know that federal HR people are within their rights to exclude you for not including it. So I routinely encourage my clients and kind of insist on it that they use a full address. So that's one kind of right up front difference between federal and private sector. It is absolutely expected. I should,
Right.
yeah, and I should say, like you mentioned, that recruiters will use zip codes. Federal HR people will use areas as well, because oftentimes positions are posted as open to people in specific locations. And if people aren't showing the right location, they will be automatically excluded.
Correct. So it just goes to show that on both of the federal and the private sector resume, that the address is really one of those things that so many people, I just worked with somebody today and he had no address on his resume whatsoever. And I had to explain all this to him, and he said, wow, I never realized what my address, not having an address on my resume, could do. And that's a big mistake that people often make.
Yes.
Leaving it off completely.
I agree. Another big mistake I see people make is with their email addresses.
Oh, yes. We have stories. We can talk about this all day.
Absolutely. Please, whether you are federal or private sector, please have a professional sounding email address. Take it away, Ellen.
Yes, nothing silly allowed. I have some very silly ones that I have to say to these people. I think it's time, especially even like college grads especially, but even higher level. They've just had the habit, or they just want that one email, they're attached to it. And, again, we need to make sure that they change it over to a professional resume and do away with those, because it does not help your brand at all.
So what do you consider a professional email address?
So to me, a professional email address is your first name, last name, or say I put in Ellen Steverson at gmail.com and there's already an Ellen Steverson. I might try ER Steverson or Steverson ER, like a combination of your name. The other issue that a lot of people make the mistake of is adding numbers. And I'm okay if you want to say like ER Steverson 1. However, if you use double digits or more than, 2 digits, you can run the risk of having a number on there that is an actual birth year. So a lot of times when I talk to my clients, again, just this morning, I said to somebody, oh, so you're 42. And the man was like, what? How did you know how old I am? Well, that's because he put the last 2 digits of his birth year in his email. So that can be not only from an unprofessional point of view, but it's also for security. You really don't want to think of all the places and all the people who get your email. Do you really want to be giving out the year you're born? Because that's part of identity theft. So you don't want to be doing that. But also the equal employment opportunity laws, where companies are concerned about age discrimination, so they don't want to know your age, and you're putting it on your resume and putting it out there. And so, again, that is seen as a negative.
Well, how about those clients who have had AOL as their email address for 30 plus years? What do you think about that?
Yes, I think people who are still using old platforms need to upgrade. The most popular one right now is Gmail. I get people who use, smaller local platforms like bellsouth.net and things like that. Again, when you're using these old platforms, companies will wonder, are you staying up with technology? How computer savvy are you? So again, you want to be kind of keeping up with technology and systems and platforms and changing your email accordingly.
And I guarantee you, no one under the age of 50 still is using AOL as their email address.
Right.
And if you are attached to your AOL, I understand you don't have to let it go, but you certainly shouldn't be using it for professional business purposes. And getting a job is a professional business purpose. Now, on the federal side, no one is going to eliminate you from competition for using a silly email, right? I mean, I've seen, like you have, I'm sure, all kinds of silly email addresses. I had a client once years ago who wanted to join the intelligence community. And what did he use as his email address? And this is a true story. 007 man.
Yes, that's exactly the type of silly stuff we're talking about, is that type of stuff. And, you know, everybody always thinks it's the college grads, but it really can be adults as well.
Absolutely. And again, on the federal side, we won't eliminate you, but we'll definitely roll our eyes and think less of you.
Right. Well, I just worked with a person who had CT baby and then her birth year. 2 digits from her birth year. I mean, the whole thing, the month, 2 digits for her birthday, and then her year. So I knew exactly how old she was. I knew exactly when her birthday was. But she had CT baby, and I was thinking, so is that, what's the acronym? So again, you don't want people thinking crazy thoughts when they're reading your resume, like, what's the acronym for? What's all this for? When you want them to focus on the brand that you are and what you're trying to fill the role of. So when I finally asked the woman, she said it stood for Cutie Tumbler Baby, because she was a cheerleader.
Oh my.
And yes, and when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, we don't want to hang on to the past. We need to move forward, people, and get something that's appropriate. Same with new college grads, though. They don't maybe. Obviously, I have my share of college grads that will have crazy stuff. However, the mistake they make is, like, we're working on some clients' resumes this week, and they've been out of college now 2 to 3 years, and they're still using their college email address. So they're using people don't realize the college owns that email address. So really, anything going back and forth over that email is not private by any means, because it's the school's email address. But even that, when somebody looks at your name, then they look at your email, they automatically think new college grad, even though now you might have 3 to 5 years of experience. Or, oh, look, they didn't know to change their address. So again, it's a technology issue, it's a professional issue. So please really think about your email and understand it's very important.
And what do you think about people using their work emails for their job search?
Yes, let's kill that mystery. It is absolutely not professional to use your work email. Even when I work with entrepreneurs, which I work with a lot of them, I have to recommend they get a Gmail account, because again, if you're saying, hey, I no longer want to own my own business, I want to go to work for somebody else, then why are you so tied to an email address? Give it up, get a Gmail account, and show that you're ready to move on. So yes, business emails, company emails, that's a no-no.
Okay. And one more thing on email addresses, and that is people's maiden names. I've seen people have Gmail addresses with a name, appropriately, but it doesn't match the name on the resume.
Right. And I've had that conversation with so many people. Like, again, you are trying to brand yourself. And when you start having all different things that don't align, on LinkedIn, you're going by one name. On your resume, you're going by another name. But your email address says something totally different. They are wondering, why? What is going on in this person's life? Or what's the turmoil? And again, you don't want to have people wondering.
Right.
Recruiters and hiring managers want to be reassured that they're bringing in people who are qualified for the role. So these little minor mistakes that you think aren't that big of a deal really are. And then even when you say, like some people will write in their qualifying statement, detail-oriented. Well, if you're detail-oriented, why are your details of just your name not syncing across multiple platforms and multiple documents? Very important to think about.
I totally agree. And we could do an entirely separate session on LinkedIn. But let us suffice it to say here that not only should the names on LinkedIn match the name you're using on your resume, but so should your employer's titles and dates.
Yes, mirror images.
That's something else in terms of setting up a resume, and that's an objective. Many people grew up, and I still see them again and again, resumes with objectives. What is the current thinking around that?
In the private sector, again, we have stopped using objectives. They always, when I was an executive recruiter, I would always kind of get a little chuckle at what people would write because, again, you don't have to tell somebody you're looking for a great company to come work for. It's pretty much a given. Like, everybody wants to work for an ethical company, a growing company. So there's no reason to say that. And, you know, if every spot on your resume is really important real estate and what you're going to put on it is supposed to show them you're qualified, putting information like that is just not needed. So instead, we've gone to qualifying statements where you're trying to, in a couple of lines, 3 to 5 lines, explain why you're qualified, or maybe put something a little bit unique in that section about yourself that grabs their attention and makes them want to read more.
Okay. So on the federal side of things, we don't do objectives either. Your objective, of course, is to get the job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's your objective. And who doesn't want a job where you can grow and develop, right?
Correct.
Of course.
Exactly.
Duh. Everybody does. So no objectives. On the federal side, we don't call it a qualifying statement, but there's nothing wrong with that. I tend to call it a summary or a profile, but the essence is really who are you and what are you bringing to the table in the context of the job.
Correct. So those should definitely be tailored to the job posting so that you are definitely aligning your skill sets to show right away, I'm qualified, read more.
Exactly. What about fonts? One of the things that makes me crazy is when I see resumes that still use Courier as the font.
Yes, well, definitely modern fonts are the sans serif, which is the Arial, Tahoma. They have no little feet at the end or little curves at the end. The serif is more decorative, and they have strokes that kind of have little feet and the reality of it is so many resumes now are read on handheld devices or tablets. So really the sans serif fonts are best. But really, again, there are best fonts. I like Calibri and Arial, Tahoma to really give a modern, crisp resume that can be read on handheld devices.
So I will say this is a difference on the federal side. Even though the federal government still uses serif fonts, they have gotten over Courier. The standard government font is Times New Roman. But regardless of the font, please make it a standard font and not some fancy extra font that you've downloaded from the internet that is likely unable to be read or scanned or worked with by anyone who hasn't downloaded that particular font. So
absolutely, that's an excellent point because, Nancy, is that if you're downloading a font, how do you know the person receiving your resume is going to have that font in their file? So then what does your resume look like on their end? even when I work with graphic designers, which I write a lot of graphic design resumes, they want something more artsy or fun or creative. And I have to explain to them, that is not what your resume is about. If you really want to show some of your work, your creativity, maybe let's have an online portfolio, a website, or LinkedIn, put stuff on LinkedIn. But your resume is about showing you're qualified, and you don't want it to come out on the other side of somebody's computer or wherever they're reading it looking terrible. Best practice is to use these fonts that are common.
Agreed. And in that light, I still get resumes that look to me like they are the original Word 2003 downloaded template. Do you see those still?
I do, and I see people, so, all over the internet now, you can see people, downloadable template for a resume. Word has free ones, and people charge now for these fancier ones. And people come to me all the time, and they've paid money for these templates, and they filled it in themselves, but they're getting zero results. And one of the reasons that's happening is these templates have boxes. That's how they put boxes all throughout the document. So when you get the template, you just type in the boxes. But so many of the applicant tracking software can't read boxes. So your resume actually shows up blank.
And so when you say boxes, what you mean, just to clarify, is a text box, which is a formatting tool.
Correct. Formatting tool, a text box. And the thing is, you might not even see it as the person buying the template.
Right.
But you have to realize they've made the outline white to match on the paper, so you don't see it. But obviously, how does the cursor know to stop and then go around the graphic or whatever you bought for this template? And that's how they do it, is by having these formatting text boxes.
Right.
And applicant tracking software typically cannot read them. There are some newer versions that may be able to. So again, applicant tracking software best practice is never use a text box.
Right. And they are embedded in these templates.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's how they don't lose the format when they send them to you. So you pay the money, they send it to you, and then you're just typing in. But in reality, you're hurting yourself. Every resume that comes from both of us is on a Word document. All of ours are ATS friendly, so we don't do any of that.
Absolutely. And I should say here, in terms of formatting, there are some very real differences between a federal resume and a private sector resume. While a private sector resume is 2 pages or 1 page, and not 1 page with a dribble to the second page, like you couldn't edit yourself, but either 1 full page or 2 full pages, okay, with some bolding, with perhaps a little bit of color and visual interest. A federal resume is typically 4 to 6 pages and pretty much format free, because most federal applications are made through USA Jobs, which is not an applicant tracking software system, as Ellen has been referred to, but it is an automated system where your resume goes. And because that it is not that sophisticated of a system, you want to use plain text formatting, which is basically capital letters to highlight things. Because if you were to actually use the resume builder that is embedded in USA Jobs, it does not take bullets, bold, italics, underline, color, or any of the things that you might do more traditionally in a private sector resume. So, I mean, this is a whole separate discussion, but your private sector resume can be much more formatted and visually appealing to be effective than your federal resume. 2 pages is not enough to get a federal job. So
Correct.
it just isn't. And formatting is really not important at all. And as you've mentioned, formatting can really, truly hurt you.
Correct. So we might have to do another Unsolved Mysteries of the differences between a federal resume and a private sector, just that part of it, because that is a lot of information right there.
Absolutely. So today, I hope we have solved the mystery of what your resume should basically look like. We haven't talked about format at all, really, or content, but we have talked about how important it is to use your name, your real name, whether you're applying for a federal job or a private sector one. And it should be your legal name. And if you have a nickname, that's fine, but use your legal name and then put your nickname in parentheticals or parentheses or brackets followed by your last name. We talked about not, in most cases, putting anything after your name unless it's totally appropriate. But a bachelor's degree or a master of science degree is not necessary after your name. We talked about some of the differences in terms of whether your resume should have an address. And for private sector resumes, you want to have your city, state, and zip, but you don't need your street address. Whereas for a federal resume, you absolutely want to have your street address. We also discussed the criticality of having a professional sounding email, period. The differences in length, where your federal resume is 4 to 6 pages, give or take. Private sector resume is either going to be 1 or 2. The differences in the fonts you use. For a private sector resume, we talked about the importance of using an easily readable non-serif font, non-serif font, whereas in the federal government, Times New Roman is really the government standard. Did I miss any of the other mysteries that we solved, Ellen?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Good review.
All right, I want to thank you. This was Ellen Steverson, Starting Block Career Services, and Nancy Siegel, Solutions for the Workplace, helping you unravel the unsolved mysteries of resume writing. See you next time.